This video is brought to you by Access Audio.
Right.
Okay. I think it's this room. Hello.
How are you doing?
Hey Steve. So I'm assuming it's this room.
It's this room.
And look at that. That's a beautiful view. Somewhat. If you don't look at
A
the
lot of parking spots.
yeah. So we're in the bigger room. I've got acoustic. So the dark speakers, which is the higher end model, opposed to the Capello and other speakers that I showed the other day. And these have like a special rib construction, has aluminum ribs going around it. Pretty cool stuff. I gotta ask Mr. Goddard how many parts these have. He'll be happy to let me know. And then check that out. What the heck? This is a crossover? What is going on here? Telos. Very cool. I think they had this turntable last year too. Absolute monster. And I believe this is like Solution. Yep, Solution. Monsters. Look at this Telo stuff. The Suat. Check out this Telo stuff. Isn't that cool? I thought, are those Jupiter caps?
Man, look at those caps.
Are those Jupiter caps?
Hey,
Adam?
do one. I don't know. Yes.
Aren't you the expert at this stuff?
Yes.
Made
No.
in, what does it say? Dooland. They're
Yeah,
Dooland.
Dooland. That's what I thought.
They're Dooland. Even better. Yo, this stuff must cost like, like, those are all Dooland. Each one of those are like, how much? Like,
Oh, hundreds of dollars.
hundreds, like $500 a pop,
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
You have that big one over there. Isn't that like $2,500 or something like that?
Yeah, probably.
Jesus Christ. Like the camera does not do it justice. Like if I put my hand beside it, like it's ginormous. Like what the heck? I gotta ask how much that stuff is.
Here's the
Is
price
that
list.
power filtration?
Well, the power cord looks like it's 3,200.
No, that's not the one that we're talking about though. That's so the speakers are $250,000, which is their flagship, using like Actiton diamond tweeters. So absolutely. Telo stuff.
Super Twitter.
Telos, yeah. Monster Power Station, 50,000. Earth Grounding Monster, 40,000. Yeah, Monster Active Cable, 28,000. It's up there, but you kind of see why. And they even have like these, Adam, they have freaking Mundorf caps on, literally.
Wonder if it has some top.
Like mini Mundorf caps. I think these are all custom made for them, because see some values that's not readily available. He's literally actively looking it up on the website, how much it is, how much each one cost. Yeah, man, it's an insane room.
Yeah.
I thought we were covering more budget stuff today. I guess not. Exciting though.
Okay, no. Thousands of dollars.
This room was my favorite last year.
How much was it?
This specific room. I think they have the same setup.
Smaller size, and that's only 1,400.
Wow.
So
That's
that's got
just
to
for
be
the
like
cap.
$3,000 just for the cap.
Well, I'm not sure if it's that one, but on the price sheet, there's one that's 40 grand and 50 grand. Right here on the left side. On the left side.
Earth
Tell us.
Grounded Monster, yeah.
Yeah, it's like 40, 50 grand.
Okay.
And assuming it's that one down there, Monster, Monster
Yeah,
Power Station down
Monster.
there. Because that thing has like, look at the count how many dueling caps
Yes.
there are.
Yeah, but 99,000 euro. Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, this room was not just high-end, but ultra high-end, and me and my friends were just drooling, geeking out to probably one of the most expensive rooms at Expona. It's no surprise that this room was my favorite room last year. I spent a good amount of time taking notes on what I had heard last year as I was really impressed with this room. The dark speakers that were there last year was still there, which is the flagship speaker from a company called Gutter Acoustic. I actually interviewed the designer on a different video, so I'll link to that video if you are interested. But yeah, there was no mistaking that this room was ultra high-end, with Telos power stations that literally use dueling capacitors that easily cost $500 to $3,000 a pop depending on the value. But the real reason I was there this morning was for the chance to talk to the designer and CEO behind Soulutions, one of the top brands when it comes to high performance high-end amplifiers that was powering these Gutter speakers. And I heard Soulutions do things a little bit differently, so I was interested on how things are different with them and why that is.
So here's a interview happening right now. I've seen some of his videos.
Hi,
Hello, sir.
what's your name?
My name is Jay.
Ron.
I have a
So
I
nice
have a
to meet
YouTube
you.
channel, and I've seen you do interviews and stuff on YouTube as well.
Oh, very
So-
kind of you. Thank you.
So you're here early morning.
Yep, it's difficult for people to do interviews during the show.
Yes.
So I try to work with people right before the show starts or right after the show closes.
Yes,
each day.
I'll be right after you. So I'm
Okay,
just
well, I'll try not to be too long.
no worries. Take your
Thank you.
time.
Great to meet you. Enjoy
Great,
the
nice to
show.
meet you. Yeah, enjoy the show. So that's how it usually is done. It's like kind of behind the scenes. You have to come in early morning or after show hours. And that's one of the reasons when you see my coverage and you guys are like, why the hell do you look like shit? That's probably why. Minimal sleep, Adam snoring all day. Sorry, all night. There's a light operator.
That's all I do.
You just got hired.
The glamour of high-end home audio.
Yeah, there's the Steve.
Hello. How are we doing today?
He's probably the one that has to wake up the earliest because he has to.
Do a lot of coordination.
Yeah.
But it's all good.
Yeah,
It's come together. It's a great show for us.
awesome, Steve. So, gonna turn off the camera because gotta be quiet for their interview. So my first question to you is, what makes Soulutions special? And I can see that it's like very beefy, and it looks like it can drive anything. And if it's driving Gutter acoustics, I can see that it can practically drive everything. So can you tell me a little bit about your amplifier in general? What makes it special?
Yeah, I mean, of course, as you say, it's a big amplifier and it can drive any speaker out there. It's not a crazy power horse because we do not believe that we need this crazy thing of like 1,000 or 2,000 watts in 8 ohms to drive a speaker. This one is a 150 watt into 8 ohm, which goes to 600 watt into 8 ohms if you do a bridged design or a bridged mono configuration with it. So there is plenty of power for any speaker in there. But that's not the key point about the amplifier. The key point of the amplifier designs is that it's very wide bandwidth. And the wide bandwidth we do that by purpose, not because we think that we can hear anything above the audio band, but we want to have the phase response, the phase changes within the audio band as small as possible, which in the end is the key factor to reproduce the music in a way that it's very, very clear, very transparent. You get big soundstage separation between instruments and artists and get really close to the emotions. That's a key defining factor for that is actually the phase response. And these are, the amplifiers which perform the best in our opinion so far. So if you look into, let's say, some designs from our competition, you will see amplifiers which start to roll off at 20 kilohertz, just at the end of the of the audio band, which is they're very old designs that are designed like that. Then a big bunch of amplifiers go up to 200 kilohertz, something like that. So after 200 kilohertz, they start to roll off. Then we had, let's talk about the 711, for instance, the previous solution reference amplifier had a bandwidth of 1 megahertz roughly. And these new units go up to 2 megahertz. So it's if you compare to, well, 2 megahertz is really wide bandwidth compared to what usually in the industry is done for power amplifiers.
That's very cool. So, I mean, you mentioned that, higher bandwidth, yes, not because you can hear up that high, but because of phase, right?
Yes.
Can you explain the relationship between that a little bit more? How does that affect, phase?
Yeah, the phase, it's something, the phase concept, if you're not if you're not technician or in the technology, it's hard to get that concept. But to make it in simple words, or try to explain in simple words, it's as if let's take a sound event which consists of low frequency and high frequency components. They will never travel through the amplifier or through any electronic the exact same way. So there will be a phase change between the lower frequency and the higher frequency. And in the end, it's a little bit like the lower frequency components would travel through the amplifier with a different speed than the higher frequency. And once they go out of the amplifier, they are not perfectly aligned timing-wise anymore. It's technically wrong what I say, but just to get the rough image. And if you just have that concept in mind, this would result just like that the high frequency content arrives at a different timing than the low frequency content, and then the sound event doesn't sound the same again or anymore as it was when it entered the component. It's as if you would actually displace the tweeter of a speaker by 5 millimeters to the front or to the back. It's obvious that this doesn't sound the same as if it would be in the perfect spot.
So from the sound of it, this system should be the most phase coherent system in the entire show, because the Gato acoustic also, with the TDC technology, is very adamant about that as well, right? The phase relationship. So I can see that you guys are taking a similar approach there. So another question that I had was the amplifiers are very beefy. They're very, very big.
Yeah.
The camera doesn't really do it justice. And I was surprised to learn from actually the interview that I saw before mine that it's using switching power supplies.
Yes.
So can you tell me why it's using switching power supplies? A lot of audiophiles, like my viewers, even myself, would be like, we like linear power supplies because they're beefy, they're big, they have a stigma, of being an audiophile kind of grade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Switching power supplies, not so much. It's kind of viewed as like a cheap alternative. Can you explain to us why you decided to use switching power supplies?
Sure. I mean, that's true. What you say, the image of switch mode power supplies in the audiophile community is not the best, and there is a reason to that. The reason, I think, it goes back to the start when switch mode power supplies were first introduced into these components. The target of using the switching power supplies back then was to have to profit from the smaller space they require in the component, and you can of course make a switch mode power supply work at low cost. So it was a cost optimization. But if you do both, so if you do reduce a design on a switch mode power supply which is small and is really low cost, usually you compromise on performance. And most of those designs back then, when the bad reputation of the switch mode power supply for audio components actually was created, were based on these kind of designs. Now, if you go the other way and say, okay, let's look at the technology of switch mode power supply. What is it doing versus a linear power supply? There is a lot of advantages which speak for the switch mode power supply. They're, apart from just being smaller or eventually lighter or whatever. If you look at the amplifiers, they are big switch mode power supply in there, so there is big switch mode power supplies in there. The big advantage of a switch mode power supply is it's a regulated power supply. So the output voltage is always held constant. This is usually not the case in linear power supplies. There are some which do that, but usually the linear power supply is not regulated. which means that whenever the amplifier is pulling current from the power supply, the supply voltage will drop down. And then, of course, in a negative feedback design like we have, you have some pretty good power supply rejection ratio, which means that this drop in voltage would not affect the output signal that much, but it does. And then it's a question on how much, right? And a question of design, whether this is then having an impact or is a significant impact or not. With switch mode power supplies, the changes in voltage, in the supply voltage, they're really minimal. We measured that. We did the measures on the old 710 design, which used linear power supplies. And when you measure the supply voltage to the amp and play some music, you can see that the supply voltage is dropping by 5 to 10%, even though we had a very good linear, well, actually, we thought we did a very good design of a linear power supply. Still, the voltage drops. With a switch mode power supply, this remains within a few millivolts. And even for massive bass attacks, it's stable. And this one big advantage, you have much preciser conditions for the amplifier. And then the switching of the switch mode power supply, that's usually the part where people think, well, it's switching and there is noise. And it's switching at 100 kilohertz. So 100 kilohertz is already outside of the audio bandwidth. We cannot hear that switching, right? Then, of course, there is switching noise. Of course, there is. But it's pretty easy to filter noise at these high frequencies. It's much more difficult to filter noise in the 50, 60, 100 hertz region. And this is where the linear power supply is actually creating a lot of problems. The big toroidal transformers, they will emit fields, magnetic fields. The amplifier sections can pick that up. So you have a direct connection of, let's say, 50 hertz noise, which gets picked up by the amplifier, which is just finding its way into the audio signal. You don't want to have that, of course, but you start to filter, and there's a lot of things you can do to optimize that. Then the ultimate step is to make an outboard power supply so that the transformer is as far away from the amplifier stages as possible. But if you do that, then you compromise on the output impedance, which should be ultimately low on the power supply because you have to add additional cables, connectors, and an ideal output impedance, well, the ideal output impedance of a power supply should be 0. We deal here in a 717, we have maybe 5 to 10 milliohms. So not even a very high grade capacitor, let's say a Mundorf or Dual-Ond or whatever capacitor, would have a higher ESR than what this power supply actually is able to output. So we don't need those capacitors anymore, the big capacitors anymore in the power supply. And in a linear power supply, you have the problem that you cannot get close to the power amp, otherwise you have all these potential issues with noise. And that's pretty cool about the switch mode. You can actually put it just right next to the amplifier stage and have the shortest signal path you can just imagine. So in the 717, the amp board, the power amplifier board is screwed on the output terminals of the switch mode power supply. So there is no cable in between. It's the shortest connection you can get. And this is, of course, an advantage because it helps reduce the output impedance of the power supply.
Very cool. So, I have my own opinions about switching power supplies, and when it comes to switching power supplies, they definitely measure better. But some audiophiles will say, like myself, will say, well, yeah, it measures better, but when I hear amplifiers with linear power supplies, they have more heft, they have more body to the sound, and switching power supplies just sound lean and lifeless. But that depends, at least for me, depends on the type of the switching power supply. And so my question is, do you design your own switching power supply? What's the switching power supply that you use, and your opinion on what I just said about those opinions?
So what we use, our experience is the exact opposite. So we have been testing our linear power supply versus the switch mode power supplies, and you get much more control in the bass. That's exactly where it happens. The control you get out of a switch mode power supply is much better. So that the bass is I wouldn't say not beefier, not heavier, but it's more controlled. And that's one point which is maybe you start to learn over time. Whenever the bass gets more precise, it sounds a little bit leaner, which is not a bad thing, because if the sound gets more precise, you have more resolution in the bass. You actually can follow bass lines which go deep, really down, much better than with a power supply which does not provide this kind of control. So when we did these comparisons between the linear and the switch mode power supplies, this was actually the striking point, that we had much more resolution in the bass and much better control in the bass. Now, the switch mode power supplies we use in here we do not design these by ourselves. That's an industrial grade power supply, which just happens to be ideal in the configuration for our power supplies. We did test many of those, and it's not, you cannot just go out and say, okay, I pick a power supply and that will fit perfect. We did test a lot, and some of them sound great, others not at all, and it's not easy. Usually the point is that the specs, the parameters you're looking for, they are not specified with those, because it's not the application they are built for. So you really have to go out and test.
And at the end of the day, you have to listen to it, right?
Exactly.
And proof is in the listening, as they say. Outside of the power supply, what other factors are in consideration, and what makes Soulutions special outside of the power supply?
Well, Soulutions always followed the path, well, as I said already, wide bandwidth,
right,
amplification, and we always loved negative feedback.
Okay.
So to tell you the truth, a lot of amplifiers in the world which are on the market, they use negative feedback. Maybe it's local negative feedback or not global negative feedback, but most of the amplifiers use that. And we always said, hey, the concept of negative feedback is so strong, so it's such a good control, such a good tool. We would like to use that in the amplifiers, but you need to make it work right? And the challenge is, the more negative feedback you apply, the wider bandwidth you must make. You must make the amplifier more wider bandwidth. This goes together. If you just try to add negative feedback without increasing the bandwidth, you will not achieve the result. And going high bandwidth is of course a challenge in making the amplifier stable. And that's really a challenge. It's not just straightforward. So you have to make sure that the amplifier circuit actually works in a perfect condition for all the loads you apply, and that's not an easy task. And that's why often let's say it's more economic to reduce the bandwidth a little bit, maybe reduce also the negative feedback a little bit, just to come to an end. It's okay. That's
just a balancing act.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. But if you really push it, then more negative feedback is better than a lot.
That's interesting, because a lot of manufacturers would say zero negative feedback, right? That's like almost a marketing thing that's going on.
Yeah, there's a belief that negative feedback is a bad thing, and I mean this also goes back way back in the past. That of course there has been amplifiers which applied a lot of negative feedback and sounded terrible, and vice versa as well. There's a lot of amplifiers that apply no or very little negative feedback. They sound terrible as well. So it's not the technology which is the wrong. It's the implementation makes a difference, right?
I do appreciate your approach here, because a lot of the companies, they look at these things and like you mentioned, it's technology with bad stigma because of past designs that didn't sound so good, and that stigma sticks with some of the audiophiles, especially the older generation that has gone through that, right? They've seen it. They're like, okay, negative feedback bad.
Yeah.
And manufacturers even to this day use that and say, oh well, our amplifier has no negative feedback, lowest negative feedback, right? NFB. And here you are, kind of going the opposite way, because you've tested it and you've done your R&D. Is it Class A?
It's a Class AB.
Oh, it's Class AB.
But it's a rather high Class A portion on it.
High bias. Yeah.
High bias. So we need the surface and the heat sinks to dissipate
How heavy is it?
It's 50 kilos, so just
So-
about
so-
100 pounds.
So you're not just using any. You have a beefy switching power supply.
Oh
in
yeah,
there.
yeah.
It must be pretty massive for it to be 50 kgs.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty massive. It's 4 modules in there, which can which supply 600 VA each. But the cool thing about these modules we use in here is that usually a switch mode power supply just works up until the rating, let's say 600 VA, and then it shuts off. This one can output 3.8 times the nominal power, so close to 2,400 per module, so 4 times in this unit, so above close to 9,000 VA. It can output that for 5 seconds, so we can actually go. It's a much bigger power supply than it actually looks like for 5 seconds. And of course, if you pull more than this power for more than 5 seconds, it would shut off as well. You will never achieve or get into this situation in an audio signal anyways, but the big advantage of that is that these kind of power supplies have a way lower output impedance because they need to have a lower output impedance to be able to provide that power. So that's pretty cool in the 717. And the size it's because of, we need it for the heat dissipation.
No, I appreciate that. I think we talked quite a bit about the power amplifiers because I'm very curious about them, but you don't just have power amplifiers here. You have phono stage, preamplifier, and so on. Can you tell me a little bit about your other components and what makes them special?
Well, in the system we have a 727 preamplifier, a 757 de-emphasis preamplifier, and a 760 DAC. All of these components are again wide bandwidth designs. So the preamp, for instance, has a bandwidth of 20 megahertz, which is quite crazy. But again, the target here again is to reduce the phase impact or to optimize the phase response, which of course is even better than what we can achieve in the power amp. But that's what we have here. The 757 is a de-emphasis preamplifier, which works pretty much on every analog source. So you can hook up an MC/MM cartridge, you can hook up a tape, or an optical cartridge, and it can reproduce most or pretty much any of the de-emphasis curves around. So very flexible as an analog source. And then the 760, the special thing about that is it's a DAC which is again optimized for phase response. Although it's a pretty old design, even back then, we applied a technology which we call zero phase technology. The cool thing about that is a DAC always uses a low pass filter in the output. It's a must-have just to filter out the high frequency content after the switching DAC or the DAC. So, and this low pass filter always has a roll off in the phase, which is pretty heavy. And in the 760, we said, okay, if we do a phase de-emphasis in the digital domain, so we can actually add the inverse phase degradation, what the analog filter will do, we end up in a situation where we have zero phase distortion. Of course, we cannot get exactly to zero, but pretty close to zero. And this makes a huge difference. And again, of course, the same as we discussed already for the amp or the preamps, this makes a big sonic difference.
On top of your head, do you know the output impedance
Of
the preamplifier?
The output impedance is 0.1 ohm.
0.1 ohms.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, that is very low. And that's a good thing. You want to have a low output impedance and a high input impedance, generally speaking. And I'm assuming the input impedance matches.
Input impedance on the power amp is 2.2 mega ohms.
Oh, okay, so it's very high.
Yes.
Yeah. And the reason for that, in technical terms, is basically you don't want to lose any signal, and that's pretty much it. Like you put 4 volts, 4 volt signal, 4 volts. If you have a high output impedance and then a low input impedance, then you will lose signal, which rarely happens these days. But this is obviously high-end audio, so we're going above and beyond. So for those that are looking at high-end audio amplifiers in the market, I mean, there's so many options these days, right? For those that's watching, considering Soulution, what should they expect in terms of sound? Why should they choose Soulutions as their solution, pun intended, versus other competitors that they're looking at?
Well, if you look, the solution provide neutral sound, neutral, but not neutral in a negative connotation. It's just it transports the music as it was recorded, and it's in this respect not romantic. It's not beefy. It's just neutral, right?
Right.
And just if you're looking into this kind of sound which has no colorations, no additions or no deletions anywhere, then that's the solution for you. Of course, there's a lot of other options, and it's really in the end it's a choice of the end user what he prefers in terms of sound. But if you're into that kind of, I want to experience the music as it was recorded, that's definitely something you should try out.
And also, I would add that you guys are one of the standouts in terms of actually being able to objectively identify key things and to apply it in your equipment. Meaning, it's not just I heard it and it sounds better, so we did this, which is a response that I get often. You actually have objective data to back it up.
Yes.
Actually
Yes.